Hello from Brussels, and thank you very much for the invitation to be with you, all of you, today. Many business practices that were common 10 or 20 years ago are no longer acceptable. In my grandparents' village, when I was growing up, the local river was so polluted that it wasn't even safe for us to touch the water. When I saw old pictures of my parents and their friends in that same river beach, swimming and enjoying themselves, I almost could not believe it was the same place, the same river. Since then, a cellulose company had completely polluted the river. However, because it created many jobs in the area, people thought this was normal. These days, do you think this would have been acceptable today? I don't think so. This is because we now see companies' responsibility very different. Today, we as citizens demand that companies take an active part in creating sustainable society and in protecting the environment. And many companies also know that not doing so could have negative impacts on their reputation. This is what the Directive on Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence is about. Some member states, as you know, have already introduced national rules on due diligence. This forced some companies to analyze and change their practices to reduce their negative impacts on society and the environment, of course. But companies in other countries are also, of course, free to engage in due diligence efforts voluntarily. Why not? But despite this, according to the Commission study, only 37% of businesses in Europe currently conduct environment and human rights due diligence. First, this means that the majority of companies do not voluntarily engage in these efforts. And therefore, voluntary standards that already exist, for example, from OECD, are not enough. And second, the current scenario provides disincentives to the companies that want to do the right thing. So choosing to perform due diligence and to change business practices in line with human rights and sustainability does not give a company an advantage over its competitors. On the contrary, it might even create disadvantage as these efforts require resources from them. This is why this directive is so important, to fight unfair competition. As you know, with it, companies will be required to identify and mitigate adverse impacts of their activities on human rights, such as child labor and exploitation of workers, and on environment, of course. The Committee on Legal Affairs of the European Parliament voted its position on this proposal last month, after a lot of discussion on different amendments we prepared. Between other aspects, the Parliament proposed that in 4 years, all companies with over 250 workers would have to comply with this directive with a short period for larger companies, such as those with over 1,000 employees. 3 years period to adapt themselves. The Parliament also proposes that these rules apply to non-European companies with a turnover higher than 150 million euro if at least 40 million was generated in the European Union. We also called for non-compliant companies to be liable for damage. EU governments should establish supervisory authorities with the power to impose sanctions and the national help desks to support the implementation of this directive, to inform companies about what they need to do. Moreover, we argue that fines should be at least 5% of a company's net worldwide turnover, and that non-compliant third country companies should be banned from public procurement. In order to address climate change, company directors would also be obliged to implement a kind of transition plan compatible with a global warming limit of 1.5 degrees. I know this is a very ambitious proposal. However, I want to make something clear. This directive is not anti-business. Around 70% of companies participating in the preliminary study on due diligence as well as in public consultation agreed that harmonized EU legal framework on due diligence for human rights and environment impacts is needed. This proposal is about creating incentives for companies to join the fight for human rights and sustainability, as well as assure legal certainty and level playing field, fighting unfair competition between companies that follow due diligence and the other ones. I want to finish again, thank you very much for the invitation, and by apologizing for not being able to be with you today, and by wishing you very fruitful discussion on this so important topic. Of course, I'm available to any contact you want to do and also to discuss about other proposals of this directive.